There is a strange moment that almost everyone experiences. Someone who once laughed with you suddenly becomes different. They don't argue. They don't complain. They don't tell you they're upset. Instead, they become emotionally distant. They reply with one-word answers. They stop asking about your day. They look at you as if your presence no longer matters. And something unexpected begins to happen. You stop focusing on them and start questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? Why are they acting this way? Should I message again? Without realizing it, you're no longer in control of your own emotions. They are the frightening part. They never threatened you. They never shouted. They never even lied. Sometimes, the strongest form of psychological influence looks exactly like indifference. This is coded soul, where human nature is decoded. Hidden motives are exposed, and the psychology behind power, manipulation, and respect is brought into the light. Because once you understand the mind, you become much harder to control. Most people believe pretending not to care is a sign of strength. It isn't. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to prove itself. Someone who is genuinely at peace rarely feels the need to convince you they don't care. Ironically, the louder someone performs indifference, the more likely they're trying to hide something, because pretending is still a performance, and every performance has an audience. Ask yourself something. Have you ever said, "It doesn't matter," when deep down, it mattered more than you wanted to admit? Most people have, not because they're manipulative, but because being honest feels risky. Showing emotion means becoming vulnerable, and vulnerability can be frightening, especially if life has taught you that emotions are dangerous. A child who was laughed at for crying may grow into an adult who never admits they're hurt. A teenager who was constantly rejected may become an adult who acts as though nobody's opinion matters, not because they stop feeling, but because they learn to hide those feelings. Carl Jung believed every person develops what he called a persona, a mask, not necessarily to deceive others, but to survive. The persona protects us. It allows us to function, to fit in, to avoid rejection. But sometimes, people wear the mask for so long, they forget where it ends and who they really are begins. This is where many people become confused, because not everyone who appears emotionally distant is playing a psychological game. There are actually two very different kinds of people. The first withdraws to protect themselves. The second withdraws to control other people. From the outside, they often look identical. Both become quiet. Both appear calm. Both seem emotionally unavailable. But their intentions could not be more different. Imagine someone who has been betrayed several times. Every relationship ended with disappointment. Every friendship ended in betrayal. Eventually, their mind makes a decision. Stop expecting people to stay. They become quieter, more cautious, less expressive, not because they don't care, but because caring became painful. Now imagine someone else. They notice something about human nature. They realize the less attention they give people, the harder those people chase them. So they begin using silence strategically. They delay replies. They suddenly become unavailable. They disappear, only to return later as if nothing happened. Not because life became busy, but because uncertainty creates emotional attachment. And whether they realize it or not, they're exploiting one of the oldest patterns in human psychology. The human mind struggles far more with uncertainty than certainty. A clear rejection hurts, but uncertainty keeps the mind searching. Searching creates obsession, and obsession creates emotional dependence. That is why pretending not to care can become such a powerful form of influence. Not because silence has magical power, but because your own mind begins filling in the blanks. And that's where the real psychological battle begins. Think about the last time someone suddenly became distant. You probably didn't become obsessed because they ignored you. You became obsessed because you didn't know why. The human brain dislikes unfinished stories. It constantly searches for answers. This is why you can remember an awkward conversation from 5 years ago, yet forget what you ate 3 days ago. Your mind is built to solve emotional mysteries. When someone acts as if they don't care, your brain immediately starts investigating. Did I offend them? Should I apologize? Are they losing interest? Every question creates another question. Before long, they occupy your thoughts without making any effort. That is the hidden power of uncertainty. Not because silence is magical, but because your imagination becomes louder than reality. And your imagination is rarely kind. It usually assumes the worst. There is another reason pretending not to care feels so powerful. Human beings naturally value what seems difficult to obtain. You see this everywhere. Limited edition products sell faster. Rare opportunities feel more valuable. Even relationships can become distorted by this instinct. When someone's attention becomes unpredictable, your brain begins treating it like a scarce resource. Scarcity creates desire, not always because the person is extraordinary, but because access to them feels uncertain. This explains why some people become more attractive only after they pull away, not because they suddenly became better, but because your brain mistakes emotional distance for increased value. This is where many people become trapped. They stop asking, "Is this person good for me?" and start asking, "How do I get them back?" That single shift changes everything, because now you're no longer making decisions. You're chasing validation. Respect is rarely lost in one moment. It disappears in patterns. Not everyone who pretends not to care is manipulative. That distinction matters. Some people simply need space. Others struggle to express emotions. But manipulators understand something most people don't. Silence can make other people work harder. Imagine this. 2 co-workers disagree during a meeting. One calmly explains their point. The other says almost nothing. The next day, they avoid eye contact. Their messages become cold. Their energy changes completely. Days pass. The first co-worker begins overthinking. They apologize, even though they aren't sure what they did wrong. Notice what happened. The manipulator never asked for an apology. They created an emotional vacuum and allowed the other person to fill it. Manipulators do not create weakness. They look for it. They notice who cannot tolerate uncertainty, who constantly seeks reassurance, who needs everyone to be happy with them. Those people become the easiest to influence because they negotiate against themselves without anyone asking them to. And that is one of the quietest forms of psychological control. Here is the part most people never consider. Sometimes the person pretending not to care isn't controlling you. Your own fear of rejection is. That realization is uncomfortable because it shifts the focus. The greatest influence doesn't always come from another person. Sometimes it comes from the story you keep telling yourself. If they ignore me, I must not be enough. If they don't reply, I must have failed. Those thoughts rarely come from the present. They usually come from much older experiences, old disappointments, old rejection, old wounds that never completely healed. The person in front of you simply activates them. And once those wounds are activated, you begin chasing answers instead of protecting your peace. The strongest people are not those who feel nothing. They are the ones who refuse to let uncertainty control their behavior, because emotional maturity isn't the absence of feelings. It's the ability to remain steady, even when you don't have all the answers. There is one mistake people make over and over again. They confuse emotional control with emotional absence. The two are not the same. A peaceful person doesn't need everyone to notice that they're calm. They don't announce it. They don't perform it. They simply live it. Someone pretending not to care often wants you to notice. Their silence becomes louder than words. Their distance feels deliberate. Every delayed reply, every cold expression, every unanswered message seems carefully designed to send a signal. Notice me, wonder about me, chase me. That isn't confidence. Confidence has nothing to prove. Real strength doesn't need an audience. Think about the people you've respected the most. Were they constantly trying to appear mysterious, or were they simply comfortable with themselves? The strongest people rarely spend energy managing other people's perceptions. They spend that energy managing themselves. That is a very different kind of power. Every mask has one weakness. It requires constant effort. Eventually, the performance becomes exhausting. Imagine someone who spends months acting emotionally unavailable. They ignore messages, cancel plans, pretend your attention doesn't matter. Everything appears effortless, until one day you stop chasing. You stop sending messages. You stop asking what's wrong. You simply continue living your life. Something interesting often happens. The person who appeared completely unaffected suddenly reaches out. Maybe it's a casual message. Maybe they react to your social media story. Maybe they ask an unnecessary question. At first glance, it looks harmless, but psychologically, something important has changed. When they stopped receiving your attention, they began feeling the absence themselves. The emotional balance shifted. The person who once seemed impossible to reach now wants reassurance. Why? Because many people aren't attached to you. They're attached to the feeling of being pursued. Once that feeling disappears, so does much of their confidence. This is why some relationships become strangely intense. Only after one person stops chasing, not because love suddenly appeared, but because control disappeared, and control can feel addictive. Carl Jung believed that every person carries a hidden side. He called it the shadow. It contains the parts of ourselves we don't like to admit exist. Our fears, our jealousy, our need for approval, our desire for control. Sometimes, the person pretending not to care is hiding their shadow. They're terrified of rejection, but instead of admitting it, they reject first. They fear being ignored, so they become emotionally unavailable before anyone can hurt them. They fear needing people, so they convince themselves they need no one. The tragedy is, the more they deny those emotions, the more those emotions begin controlling them. Because ignored emotions don't disappear. They simply find another way to speak. Sometimes through silence, sometimes through pride, sometimes through emotional games. The shadow doesn't become dangerous because it exists. It becomes dangerous when you refuse to recognize it. The same is true for you. If someone's indifference completely controls your emotions, ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Am I reacting to this person, or to something much older inside me? That question changes everything, because once you understand your own patterns, other people's games become much less effective. How to stop being controlled. Once you understand this pattern, something changes. You stop chasing answers and start observing behavior. The next time someone suddenly becomes distant, don't rush to fix it. Don't immediately apologize. Don't begin rewriting your personality just to make them comfortable. Pause. Watch. Because people's actions always reveal more than their explanations. If someone genuinely needs space, they usually communicate it, even if it's brief. I've got a lot going on right now. I need a little time to think. That isn't manipulation. That's honesty. But if someone repeatedly disappears, returns, acts warm, then cold again, only to keep you emotionally guessing, pay attention. You're not witnessing emotional maturity. You're witnessing inconsistency. And inconsistency has a powerful effect on the human mind. It creates hope, then doubt, then relief, then anxiety, over and over again. It's the same emotional cycle that keeps people attached to unhealthy relationships. Not because they're weak, but because the brain starts craving the next moment of emotional reward. The cycle becomes addictive. The attention feels valuable, simply because it isn't always available. Many people ask, how do I beat someone who pretends they don't care? That's the wrong question. Psychology isn't about winning against people. It's about refusing to lose yourself. The strongest response isn't pretending not to care even harder. That's just another performance. Real strength is different. You remain respectful. You remain calm. But you stop chasing people who enjoy being chased. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's attention, because attention is not the same as respect, and silence is not always the same as power. Sometimes, silence is simply fear wearing an expensive disguise. Here's what life quietly teaches. The people who constantly pretend not to care often care the most. They've simply become afraid of showing it. Some were hurt. Some were rejected. Some learned that vulnerability felt dangerous. Others discovered that emotional distance gave them influence. But eventually, every mask becomes heavy. No one can spend years performing confidence without wondering if anyone would still stay if they were simply themselves. That's the tragedy of pretending. You protect yourself from rejection, but you also protect yourself from genuine connection. And the longer the act continues, the harder it becomes to remove the mask. The next time someone acts as though they don't care, don't ask, "Why aren't they choosing me?" Ask, "What is this behavior trying to achieve?" That single question changes everything, because psychology isn't about assuming the worst in people. It's about seeing patterns instead of becoming trapped inside them. Remember this: respect is rarely lost in one moment. Manipulators do not create weakness. They look for it. And the greatest form of psychological self-defense is not becoming emotionally unavailable. It is becoming emotionally aware, because awareness breaks manipulation. Awareness exposes hidden motives. Awareness gives you back the one thing no manipulator wants you to have: choice. The strongest people are not those who never care. They are the ones who care deeply without allowing another person's behavior to control the way they see themselves. This is Coded Soul, where we decode human nature, one pattern at a time. Until next time, keep observing, because people will always tell you who they are, not only through their words, but through the patterns they repeat.